Okay, so very good morning to all of you. People online also, if you're able to hear me, just drop a comment. How many of you have seen the previous two lectures? देख लिया आपने? ठीक है, चलो, good to see you back. Other people also, ठीक है. This is going to be a first lecture, is it? Okay, so we have already done two lectures. One of them was on the analysis of paper of 2024. And then we had started with political theory. And in the last class we had covered pluralist theory of state. ठीक है, किस-किस को याद है pluralist theory? Okay. So before I move on to the other theories, let's say like the liberal theory of state, then we'll do neoliberal theory, then we'll do Marxist theory, and उसके बाद we'll do post-colonial, and then we move to the feminist theory of state. Okay, the sequence. Do we have any doubts till now? Other people, if you have any doubts, just let me know. People here also? I've had some of you sending me the answers that you had written, so allow me at least a day. So by today end or tomorrow morning, I'll be replying to the answers that you have sent me individually, okay? So the PYQs that we have done in the class and the list of PYQs that I've sent, you are more than welcome to write on it. If you're not able to write exactly, but still if you have a structure in place, okay? I think yesterday also I had got a query, a couple of queries on, let's say if the question is on decline of political theory, how should we structure it, okay? So broadly remember, we'll structure it in two phases. Even if the question does not mention that which area, so you have to talk about decline of political theory in both phases. What was the first decline? This was by the traditionalists, age-old rooted theories which led to behavioralism. Okay, so we'll explain that. And then of course even behavioralism declined. And we have seen why did it decline, and then how David Easton himself modified it. He had given those 7 points that we have written overall, which led to the post-behavioralism. Okay? So in case somebody is writing and you want a feedback, etc., you can let me know. I think all of you who have joined the course, you know how to join the Telegram group. You are already there. In the lecture 1 itself, I have already shared with you 3 videos to watch. Okay, these are videos very good. I think on three different themes. One of them is on Asian century. One is on the Pakistan being the master of denial. And third one is on John Mearsheimer on India, China and Thucydides trap. 3 videos share करें हैं. उसको भी देखो. And whenever you see the videos, do that in your leisure time. As and when lectures will go on, what I'll do, some of these good podcasts or commentaries, I'll also share with you so that your background of paper 2, at least some current events are already sorted. ठीक है? और उसमें when I do them, it will make your job easier, right? So now I think we'll move on. अभी कोई ऐसा doubt शायद नहीं है अभी शुरू करें. See, the videos are already shared in the Telegram group. After the very first one, so 3 lectures I have shared. Videos additionally, the ones you will also get in your portal. Okay, and this is how you can join the Telegram channel. Okay. So we are now here. The theories of state. Today we will be covering all the theories. Pluralist we have done. Post-colonial feminists. Now let's quickly have a glance at the kind of questions that have been asked from these areas. 2024 I think I've not added. When I'll upload the slide, I'll also add that. So broadly speaking, if we just do the keyword properly, direct questions have been asked again and again. For example, examine the liberal theory of state in contemporary politics. This happens to be a more analytical kind of question. We'll do liberal theory and we'll through how it has evolved. Plus we'll also see the challenges liberal theory faces. Okay? Factors like community, culture, nation weaken the hegemony of neoliberalism today. So when I'll do neoliberalism with you, I'll also tell you the challenges it faces. And one of the biggest challenges neoliberalism faced was during COVID-19. Now neoliberalism specifically talks about market fundamentalism. It will say that the state should have as less of a role as possible. We'll see it through the words of Nozick, Hayek, Milton Friedman, etc., etc. But it also faces multiple challenges. Now because of neoliberalism and also because of, we can say, globalization, the inequalities have really increased, not just in developing countries, but also in developed countries. So there is also a backlash that is coming. Okay, so then when you see factors like community, culture and nation, they are not represented right now through neoliberalism. Also, we'll see the rise of populism and authoritarian tendencies around the world and democratic backsliding, all of which also happen to be one of the weaknesses of neoliberalism. Okay, so this again is facing challenges. In fact, the same topic is also covered in paper 2A, where we talk about globalization. Okay, and there also we'll see the other challenges being faced by neoliberalism and what can be done about it. 2A mein, I'll also add a couple of things. For example, Klaus Schwab from World Economic Forum also gives ways how to save neoliberalism, how to save the neoliberal world order, which currently is in a state of decline. Okay? Then let's say feminist critique of the state. So if we read about theories of state mein feminist theory, so essentially they have critiqued the state. Why? Because according to feminists, the conception of state is based on male experience, and the male experience has been universalized to also encapsulate the feminist experience. That is a problem that they'll say. In fact, in very famous words, when I look at the state appears male to me. Okay, and we'll see the works of Susan Moller Oken, okay, Carol Hamish, Carol Pateman, in the book of Sexual Politics, etc. We'll see that. Pluralist theory of state comment. ये तो आप कर सकते हो. Okay, this already we have seen. And here you have to talk about, without giving the context, if you don't mention that it came in the critique of a context of monistic theory, then your answer is incomplete. Okay, and then of course you have to talk about Lasky, what has it said. I've mentioned GDH Cole, okay, guild socialism. Then we have spoke about MacIver, about ultimately the state should become a service state. And even in the pluralists also we have certain issues. Such as, did we do the criticism of this pluralist state? Kal kara tha humne? Ye batane, what is the criticism? अच्छा हमने करा हुआ है, ठीक है, okay, ठीक है, okay. Then critically examine neoliberal theory of state. देखो ये this has been repeated in 2018, 2017 and even this. And the part of critical examination is sometimes that is lacking. हमें नहीं पता होगा बहुत अच्छे से. Normally you know, ठीक है, I'll talk about the 10-point consensus or the Washington consensus. I'll talk about, let's say, Reaganism, Thatcherism. You'll talk about some things. But how to critically examine this, we'll also see that. Okay. Post-colonial theory of state. This is also a topic where I've seen people lacking content. Okay. Because again, we don't know much about Edward Said, his theory of Orientalism. We are not much aware about, there are two, so you have Franz Fanon, you have Gayatri Spivak, and you have other people, plus post-colonial theory को, देखो मैं आपको दो तरह से समझाऊंगा. When I do the Marxist theory of state, in Marxist theory of state, I'll also go to post-colonial societies. And there we'll also see, there are two different theories. One is the theory of development and underdevelopment. वो भी linked है इस topic से. And another theory that we'll also see is overdeveloped state by Hamza Alawi, and that is a structuralist theory of state, the Marxist structuralist theory. So normally that you see in Marxism, that same lens can also be applied here. That is one way to look at it. I'll tell you two other ways to look at it, okay, which includes the works of political modernization theory, the works of F.W. Riggs and prismatic societies, etc. Okay, so there are some of these elements that we'll have a look at. तो इसीलिए एटलीस्ट ये जो क्वेश्चंस हैं, you don't get sometimes which school of thought to refer to, which perspective to refer to. This also will go in detail. Okay. हाँ. Subaltern. So when I say about Gayatri Spivak, Homi Bhabha, etc., though they talk about the subaltern school. Okay. Just a second. हाँ. Examine the conception of state in the ideology. हाँ. In the ideology of Marxism and fascism. ये वाला जो क्वेश्चन है इसमें, because Marxism was mentioned, so I've taken it up here. But of course, ideology of fascism. So when we will do fascism, then we'll see the conception of state, its intellectual precursors, from where all it has taken. All, for example, यहाँ पे भी फिर हम बात करेंगे right from Plato to the works of other thinkers, how the conception of state has also gone through. Okay, what is the meaning of relative autonomy theory of state in Marxist analysis? In Marxist analysis, there are two major theories. One is instrumentalist view of state, okay, and second is relative autonomy theory of state. Both of them we'll see today, okay. Same thing, Marx instrumentalist approach to state. So if you again broadly see, almost all the topics have been asked in some or the other year. So our job is, again we'll have our frameworks to evaluate them, analyze them, and in some of the topics I'll also go beyond, I'll also include some contemporary challenges, so that even if you get a difficult question, you'll be able to have some sufficient points to answer it, okay. And here additionally, this post-colonial and liberal, neoliberal, we will again see with more nuanced arguments from a paper 2A perspective also, okay. So this is what we'll be discussing, okay. This is what we had done in the previous class. So let's move. Theories of state में pluralist we had already seen, so let me go back to the liberal theory of state and then we'll go about this one by one. अब देखो, liberal theory of state में first thing to remember is how it began and in fact why it had come. So here please remember, what is the context of liberal theory of state? Any idea? ठीक है, laissez-faire, I'll also talk about that. Chalo, before that, just allow me a moment. There are a couple of theories of state that you should know before directly jumping into this. So you have there is an organic theory of state, and then there is a mechanistic theory of state, okay. According to organic theory of state, just remember the state is natural and there is a ethical argument for the existence of state. That state is existing because it serves an ethical purpose or an ethical value. Organic theory of state. Iske liye I'll just give you some examples. Very prominent people. For example, even if you see the works of Socrates, Plato, even Aristotle, all of them spoke about how state is an organic entity, okay. If I even quote Aristotle, there is a quote known as state is prior to the individual. Now just a very simple explanation of this, that in the works of Socrates or Plato or Aristotle, they always saw state first of all being a natural entity, it is not forced. Whereas in mechanistic theory we'll see it is forced. In mechanistic theory we'll see social contract theory, okay. So first thing, organic theory kya hai? State is a natural institution and it has always been there. Second, it serves an ethical purpose. Why? Because it helps in development of virtues, development of values, and achieving the man's ultimate end. And all the three thinkers have supported these idea of state being a organic state, okay. So when Aristotle, ye statement bhi alag se when I do Aristotle I'll tell you, but just because I've mentioned it, state is prior to the individual. Chronologically it is not true. Chronologically we appeared, so we as an individual were there, we created families. After families we had society, we had a village, we had a society, and after that we created a state. But Aristotle simply says that, and there he presents a teleological argument. Telos, yet teleology means it is man's destiny or man's purpose to be under the state, okay. So basically just as I'm not expecting a question directly to be asked on organic theory, but because we are doing theories of state, we should know, yes, what is organic theory of state. So organic theory of state basically are only two simple keywords. It talks about state being a natural entity and state serving an ethical purpose seen in the works of, and all these are, at least Socrates and Plato, I can simply say, these are your idealist normative thinkers. Aristotle having an empirical approach but still would account that state is prior to the individual, okay. This is the organic theory of state. Now you have a mechanistic theory of state, okay. Mechanistic theory mein, of course, there is an element that the state is not natural but it is forced entity, and within that you have something known as the social contract theory, and you have very famous social contract theorists We will see three of them: Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau. Hobbes के लिए just remember there was a glorious, or there was a war, Spanish Armada around this only time. I'm not remembering the exact year. You can check around 1642, something like that. Year एक बार check कर लेना. Here there was a glorious revolution. Just the context. This is around 1688. Again, just recalling it by memory. Please cross check the year once. It will be around this time. And Rousseau में सबसे Rousseau के लिए we just remember the French Revolution. And Rousseau's thoughts etc. were very prominent in the French Revolution. अब देखो social, whenever now you write Hobbes, you can always say social contract theorist like Hobbes. Now what is a social contract? Okay, ऐसा तो है नहीं, we again went and we created a contract. It is again a hypothetical concept. Okay, that if there are people and there is a state, so there is a contract between them, and in this contract what you will have, that state is providing protection. For example, Locke says that the role of the state is to provide protection to property, to your life. Okay, whereas same Hobbes say that if there is no state, what is human nature? What would it lead to? The life will be nasty, poor, brutish, short. Okay. Similarly, Rousseau will talk about the general will. Okay, that it is ultimately the state that will ensure harmony. All of them have different ways to achieve their ends. That is not the purpose, but main thing is to know that there are different ways in which a state is going to be formed. Okay, so you would have an organic theory of state and you would have mechanistic theory of state. And I am going to talk about the liberal theory of state. And that is why I mentioned Locke to you. In 2018, there was a question, and we should also know that Locke is the father of liberalism. Okay, so I hope only if you need to know just this basic, and with that I'll move ahead. So if I'm talking about the liberal theory of state in very broad terms, how can I divide it? Okay, so here one which your friend spoke about, the laissez-faire state or laissez-faire capitalism. And then you have a welfare state. And this distinction is also important to understand. Okay, now if this distinction is clear to you, then also you will understand the neoliberal theory of state which will come after this. Ab dekho, laissez-faire capitalism and welfare state. When I say laissez-faire, which thinker comes to mind? Adam Smith, याद आता है, ठीक है? Now, when the word capitalism is mentioned, please remember this is the economic dimension of liberalism. Liberalism is a philosophy, is an ideology which will include. One second, isko I'll just. Now this will also give you a lot of clarity when I write in this format, let's say. So if I'm talking of liberalism as an ideology, what all will it talk about? So number one, it will talk about consent. Consent of what? We have given, people have given the consent to the government, okay, to rule. Which kind of government? There is a limited government. And when I'm writing liberalism, here I'm talking of classical liberalism. In general, we'll talk about classical. Welfare state is the one where we are talking about the positive liberalism. Okay, so there will be a distinction. Very shortly we'll understand. So there is consent, government of consent, which is why Locke says कि भाई it is ruled by consent. The moment you withdraw consent, or if the state does not protect you or does not protect the property, you have the right to revolt. Okay, then main focus here is individual, and this is going to be a main thing that is going to determine the relation. So individual में the dichotomy of rights, यहाँ पे main thing is about rights. They would not focus too much upon duties. In the socialist or the Marxist state, they will be again the quest for duties. Individual is supreme, and जो limited government है, उसके लिए again a term that is used is You want freedom, you want liberty, and the state should be you want a night watchman state. That the state should only fulfill those ends which are absolutely necessary. Okay? Which then, if you apply in economic sense, in economic terms, will lead to something is capitalism. So in the economic sphere, you don't want any intervention of state, which is why Adam Smith will speak about the invisible hand, okay, and how the market should regulate themselves. They should not be regulated by the government. I hope we are clear till here. So this is again, and before liberalism, try to see what was there. So before liberalism, in fact, when we just spoke about Locke being the father of liberalism, Locke is also known as, or one of the very important propounders of natural rights. Yes or no? ये भी एक topic है which we'll see when we do thinkers. And before natural rights. So if I'm writing liberalism here, again we have, you can also make your notes accordingly. So before this you had the divine rights theory. Now, divine rights theory, you had medievalism. In medieval times you had feudalism. Okay, that most of the land either is taken care by the state or by the church. People could not have access to land. Okay, in the same manner, if you don't have access to property, you cannot do business, you cannot have your own work. This was preceding liberalism. So when Locke would come, and not just Locke, Adam Smith, Herbert Spencer, other people, when they will come, they will talk about how to, or how individuals have natural rights to own property. Okay, and in doing so, they will lay the base of capitalism, which is laissez-faire, and laissez-faire basically will talk about how you would have, or just remember a couple of keywords here. Of course, we'll talk about Adam Smith, the invisible hand. Okay, so market should not be regulated. I'll also tell you some quotes related to them. But main thing is, in the liberal theory of state, whenever we write, we will remember two broad things. One is the laissez-faire capitalism, and one is the welfare state. Okay, now we already know what happened during Industrial Revolution. Okay, and again, first of all, I'll give you a very simple explanation. Then we'll build on that. Now, when there is laissez-faire capitalism, okay, and then there will be claims that everybody should work as much as they can. So naturally, over a period of time, this will lead to widespread inequalities. These inequalities will lead to ultimately the spread of socialism. Ab, ye capitalism and classical liberalism will talk about equality of opportunity. But equality of opportunity is actually going to lead to inequalities. Those who are already well off, they'll be able to work better. They will amass a lot of wealth, and they will simply say that whatever wealth you have, whatever resources you have, are totally owned by you. So this is only going to create more and more inequalities. So the equality of opportunity, which is a core tenet, will be challenged by socialism through the equality of outcomes. Now, seeing this, let's say, change, and seeing this backlash, you would see, and we would see, the rise of welfare state. अब welfare state में देखो हमेशा यही चीज रहेगी. Normally in liberalism, ultimately the fight is how much individual and how much state. In classical liberalism, you have maximum liberty given to individual and very small, very limited role to the state. But because of this, there is a rise of inequalities. Now what will happen here? The state will become more powerful, to the extent that state is now going to ensure fiscal stimulus. Okay, state will ensure positive interventions. So yahan pe you've also heard terms like positive liberty, negative liberty. Okay, here you will see the aspect of the positive liberty. Here you had the aspect of negative liberty. What is positive liberty here? That intervention of state to ensure development for the people, either in education or in health or in creating institutions. So positive liberty is associated with development, main thing. And here we will see people like very prominent person, T.H. Green, one of the most important persons related to welfare state, who would talk about that why positive liberty and why intervention of state is very important. Okay. Now let me again go back to the times around World War I when it ended. World War I when it ended led to a Great Depression. Okay. This is again for your understanding. After that we move into our format. So here already there is no demand. So then the state is going to infuse a lot of money. Okay. So you have Keynes. Okay. So Keynes, his Keynesian economics will talk about that even the positive intervention of state can help in revival. Okay. All of that will go well. But again this is going to be challenged. So after this you would have two more theories, right? These two more theories, one of them of course is the neoliberal theory of state. Ab neoliberal theory of state kya bolega? I'm making all of this in one slide so that you can make your comparisons. These are the two broad things. Now we'll also see two more, okay? So one of course where we'll see, for example, capacity building, etc., works of Amartya Sen. And we'll also see, for example, neoliberal theory. Neoliberal theory is very similar to the classical liberalism. Neoliberal theory will simply say welfare state is going to lead to decline of freedom. The intervention of state is going to encroach on your freedom. So they will talk about, so you have again people like Nozick, Hayek, Milton Friedman, who will extensively say again the same thing which Adam Smith used to say, market is fundamental. They will talk about go for privatization, deregulation. All of these things will be talked about neoliberal theory, which will again say you have to make state supreme. And during 1970s, Reagan in USA and Thatcher in UK. So Reaganomics, Thatcherism again spoke about state should not become a nanny state. The term nanny state that is used is simply used for the state which has become all too powerful, which is intervening a lot. That is a nanny state. Okay. So their claim always is that ensure that the state should be limited in its approach as less as possible. Okay. At the same time, you would also have the theory of social liberals. I should have written social liberals here. One of them, for example, is Amartya Sen, which again you have a capacity building approach. Ab ye hai social liberals. Okay, so you have elements that they will also talk about how welfare state should also be there, but at the same time you should also mix and have some elements of capitalism also. How? Through capacity building. This is how you can also eradicate poverty and also ensure development. Okay, so I'll also tell you some more thinkers as we move along, but main thing is to understand what is happening all across. Then you would have neoliberal theory. Everything will go fine. 1991, you have India maybe LPG reforms. Globally, you would have collapse of USSR. And then also remember neoliberal theory of state ke liye, 1991, liberalism was seen to be the end point of man's ideological evolution through works of Francis Fukuyama. Okay, everything will go fine, but again remember 2008 market crisis. Okay, and 2008 market crisis will again make the claims of neoliberal state hollow. Neoliberal state simply says that there are institutions which are too big to fail. But we also saw the collapse from Lehman Brothers, which culminated into widespread issues across not only US but around the world. So even neoliberal theory will face challenges. Second, if the state does not take into account inequality, you will again see the rise of socialist movements, left movements around the world. Okay, so even this is facing challenges. Another challenge it would face is COVID-19. The thing that we saw in pluralist theory, okay, sovereign is the one that is there in emergencies or in exceptions. Same thing, the moment COVID-19 came, there were so many articles saying The state has now become a Leviathan. Hobbes has a book, Leviathan, right? So we'll say the same thing in this regard. Okay? So, because of COVID-19, state intervention was in fact allowed. So finally you have to see what is the current state of affairs. So I hope we're able to just know some of these important terms. I hope we're clear on it. Let me just see the comments overall. People online who are watching, I hope till here, this is overall how we have to have a thought process in mind with respect to this. Now one by one, I'll introduce this, okay, and we'll see what are their works. Ab they say a important statement, the government, that government is best which governs least. Also attributed to Thomas Jefferson. We can also have Thoreau. Ab ye cheez aap classical liberalism maybe you can also write. The same statement can also be written in the neoliberal state, okay, with the same format. Okay. So this is number one. Now instead of writing this down, I will show you, of course the quote is important, which can be used, but we would also see a proper table where I have outlined the 4 major schools of thought within liberalism. Okay, इसको बस अभी कोट लिखना है अपने को. उसके बाद let's quickly have a look at this. We've already seen this, but just as a quick recap, you have classical liberalism. Here only few keywords are mentioned, but we've already seen more keywords, right? So you have negative liberty. What is negative liberty? Least intervention of the state. In fact, you would stop the state from doing things so that you can have your own liberty. You have individual rights. Of course, here the primacy is on individual. Everything is about individual. Ye same thing Marxist criticize karenge. Marxist will say social relations, social bonds are very important. Same issue communitarians will criticize. Communitarians kahenge, and we'll see that this is an atomistic view of a man, of a person. But they will go that man is a self-embedded individual, or they are embedded in the society. They cannot be divorced, or they cannot be individual entities only. Okay? So while classical liberalism will focus on individual rights, other school of thought will be opposing them. Okay? It will talk about limited government, yes or no? So this we can expand on that. Of course, this is going to be, if the government is not limited, there are chances of that having overreach. It may overstretch. Okay? Now here, of course, the prominent persons being John Locke. Ab jab bhi John Locke likhoge, in this context, you have to mention he's the father of liberalism. Okay? You have Adam Smith. With Adam Smith, we'll talk about the laissez-faire. Okay? And which happens to be the economic form, okay, of liberalism. You have Jeremy Bentham. Any idea what he spoke about? Utilitarianism, the greatest good for the greatest number. That is what Jeremy Bentham spoke about, which is also applied here in liberalism. The greatest good for the greatest number. You also have, and I think here it is not mentioned, Herbert Spencer. Okay, he will in fact talk about social Darwinism. Darwinism क्या होती है बताओ? What is Darwinism? Survival of the fittest. In the social sense, what this will be? That only the people who are working hard, okay, and whatever property they are amassing, this is right. In fact, Sumner also said that if there is a drunkard lying outside, he is in a rightful place. A drunkard is where he ought to be. So this, through these ideas, through social Darwinism, ultimately this will lead to rise of inequalities. Okay? So चाहे Herbert Spencer की बात हो, social Darwinism, and I mentioned Sumner. Sumner said a drunkard is where they ought to be. This is totally justifying the social structure that is there. So in fact it simply means, so I just write it, a drunkard is where they ought to be. So even if somebody is poor, they are poor because they are not working hard. If somebody is rich, they are poor because they are working hard, but this also ignores their privileges. This ignores the access to land or property. So this is what is present in classical liberalism. Natural rights, abhi humne dekha, propounded by Locke, okay, which goes against the divine theory of rights. Okay, we've seen what is laissez-faire, we've seen consent, rule of law, constitutionalism. All of these are the important features of the classical liberalism. Okay, then you have modern liberalism, which will basically, modern liberalism se yaad rakho, focus on the welfare state. Okay, so here you have main scholar, हमें दो याद रखने हैं, T.H. Green, L.T. Hobhouse, which again there is positive liberty, we just saw that. Now they will talk about equality of opportunity and social justice, but they will also mix the elements of classical liberalism as well. So they will simply say, if we don't talk about social justice or welfare state, we cannot take into account the inequalities that are present in the world. Okay, यहाँ पे क्या होना चाहिए? State होना चाहिए, enabling state has to be there. Okay, promote welfare, education, health. This is what we understood, right? अब ये जो दो terms है, difference principle and principles of distributive justice, are attributed to John Rawls. Okay, so when I do justice, I'll explain them more, but simply understand, according to John Rawls, if there is a society, in a society, if there is progressive taxation, what you are doing in progressive taxation? The richer are taxed more, but what is the purpose? So that you redistribute the wealth from rich to the poor. So he will say that in distributive justice and in difference principle, that this inequality or this distinction is justified only if it is helping the disadvantaged sections. Okay, so he in itself also will speak about again an enabling role of the state. Okay, then we come to social liberalism, and again these two are again having their own works. Yahan pe you have civil liberties, social and economic welfare. One thing that we all would remember is Amartya Sen. Other than that, if you want to remember anybody, you can remember John Dewey. Michael Ignatieff में spelling थोड़ी सी मुश्किल हो सकती है. So remember the easier one, or even just remember Amartya Sen, your job is done. Okay. So यहाँ पे Amartya Sen है, you also have the Martha Nussbaum. आगे जब rights पे and other theories में जाएंगे, I'll also tell you other thinkers. अभी के लिए even if you remember one or two thinkers for each of them, your job is done. यहाँ पे you have a progressive state. So here what the state is going to do, ensure capabilities and dignity along with rights. इसीलिए when we do rights, in rights we'll again talk about Amartya Sen. Okay, that rights are essentially ensuring capability of somebody. Otherwise rights are, one of the theories, rights are claim of a person, that this is what I want. But another approach is rights also mean you improve their capability. Okay, and Amartya Sen is very prominently known for the capability approach. There is a broad development approach. Capability है, development की बात है, and there is a talk of human dignity. Now, whenever you see the term human dignity, also in your mind, remember Immanuel Kant. You also read about Kant in your ethics. Okay, so Kant will be one of the staunch critics of utilitarianism. He will be a staunch critic of classical liberals, because the moment you say greatest good for the greatest number, the moment you say a drunkard is where they ought to be, you are simply justifying the inequalities. You are not treating how a man should be treated, okay, or a person should be treated, because all individuals are people of dignity. Okay, so which is why you will see Kant having a strong influence even in the work of John Rawls. So Kantian influence हर जगह दिखेगा wherever you see dignity. Okay, that is the work of Immanuel Kant. Okay, then of course you have talked about social markets and distributive justice, and then you have neoliberalism, which I'll take up again very shortly as a separate topic in itself. अब इसमें देखो market primacy if I say, or if I say market fundamentalism, it will make the same sense. It will say roll back of the state, because the welfare state was having a very predominant role in its work. So what I'll say, roll back the state. Okay. These are the very prominent persons, Frederick Hayek, Milton Friedman, and Robert Nozick. Just one point I'll tell you. In yesterday's class, while writing about sovereignty and state, we spoke about Thomas Friedman. So there are two different people. Just for your reference, I'm mentioning it. In fact, even in the previous class, I also got confused. So please remember, you have Thomas Friedman, that I think we have written in the class, right? Thomas Friedman wrote one of the famous book, and he has also written a lot of articles and winner of Pulitzer Prize, etc., etc. The word is flat. ये book आपको बहुत सारे in a lot of stores, etc. ये book दिख जाती है. The moment somebody says the word is flat, what do you think? So this person is going to support globalization. He will talk about it. So Thomas Friedman, we wrote in the context of globalization, hyper-globalization, how state sovereignty and globalization is there. When I say Milton Friedman, he is a prominent exponent of the neoliberal theory of state. Similar, both of them have similar arguments, but again, Milton Friedman is far more known for his market fundamentalism and the support of neoliberal theory of state. So please remember, two different people. Although the surname is same, you might get confused. Okay? So coming back. So here, main thing, आपको Hayek, Nozick, इनके नाम by a few classes, you will remember them very easily. Okay? Main thing is, you have to talk about a minimalist state. So competition bhi ho, protection of contracts bhi ho, deregulation, market fundamentalism, privatization, all these keywords. In fact, more keywords I'll do when I do specifically neoliberal theory of state. Okay? So main thing is, please remember, there are how the liberalism has evolved. Okay? And this is how you have to do. Now, again, let's come back to the question. If you ask me, agar sawal fir se aaye, liberal theory of state, what should we write? This can be again a question because you already have so much of content. So broadly speaking, if the question is on liberal theory of state, focus on laissez-faire capitalism, then criticize it or just tell that the inadequacies of this model led to the welfare state and their scholars. And when you end it, mention about neoliberal theory, even if it is a 10 marker. However, if it is a 15 or 20 marker, when you have more, then talk about all of them, because the examiner has not mentioned exactly which specific liberal theory. Because the liberal theory and liberalism in itself has evolved over a period of time. So when you show the evolution, how this moved to this, and again you have neoliberal theory in its adequacies, you also have social liberalism. In that sense, all these then will be the liberal theory of state. Okay? And when you show an evolutionary perspective, उसमें अलग से criticism लिखने की जरूरत भी नहीं है. क्यों? Because this is replaced by this, because there are challenges. This being replaced by this or talked about this, there will be challenges. So if the question is broadly on liberal theory of state, now you know how to structure that. ठीक है? अब we'll also see. Again, if you have a 20 marker and sometimes you know that what the theory tells you and gives you, but still as a broad small heading, what is the significance, let's say, of the liberal theory of state? Okay, if we have to add. So we already know this is a foundation for the Western constitutional democracies. Whatever points I've mentioned here, you can also give a supporting thinker to also verify and substantiate it. So when I say foundation, again you can talk about how Rousseau's theory again serves as a benchmark for French Revolution. Okay, Locke, again founding father of, let's say, liberalism, but also has an important role in US, the formation of United States. So one is foundation for them. It gave rise to institutions like liberal democracies, yes, rule-based governance, market economics, we can talk about it. Now this was the dominant ideology behind this welfare state in Europe. जहां पे हमने ये टर्म लिखा है डोमिनेंट आइडियोलॉजी, इन योर मार्जिन्स कहीं पे अलग से लिख लेना, एंड ऑफ आइडियोलॉजी डिबेट. When I do ideology, I'll again explain this, that post World War II and after a lot of development, there is again no specific, because see, the grounds have changed, the conditions have changed. So there is the end of ideology simply says that ideology is not that relevant as of now. Okay, because the levels of development have ensured that the people inequalities have been reduced. So this is a separate topic that we'll do later on. But overall, liberalism and the liberal theory, देखो जब भी हम democracy की बात करते हैं, अभी भी whenever there are wars or let's say West Asia पे, so it is also said they should have liberal democracy, yes or no? So in that sense, not only is it an ideology, but it also becomes a way of life. Okay? But in some sense, by the US, it is sometimes even imposed on certain societies, right? It forms the basis of global human rights discourse. अब इसमें भी क्या है, ये सारे के सारे टॉपिक्स आपके सिलेबस में हैं. You have the topic of rights, you have ideology, you have the talk about, let's say, democracy. In fact, these are nothing but the topics from your syllabus. तो इसमें भी just our focus is not to ratify in this order, but remember, अच्छा democracy भी अपना topic है, उसको लिख सकते हैं. Ideology के बारे में बात कर सकते हैं. Human rights is again a topic of paper 1A, and this is how, and even the foundation of these constitutional democracies. So this is how you can expand on this. Okay. Now I'll talk about, this is very important, criticism. Okay. Liberal theory is doing well. अब देखो, अगर क्वेश्चन आता है, what are the challenges, okay, faced by even liberalism में same content use हो सकता है, and even the liberal theory of state, same content can be used. I'll show you how. And I have arranged it first of all in a manner of different school of thought, and then I'll tell you some general points also. So this is criticism. The heading will tell you which school of thought is saying what. Okay. So first, for example, if I say Marxist school of thought. So Marxist school of thought simply will talk about that there is a class bias. How come? That Marx or liberalism hides structural exploitation behind legal equality. Everybody they'll say is equal legally, even politically you can vote, but it does not tell the, let's say, schism or the divide between haves and have-nots. So there is always a class bias. This is again also going to be one of the most common criticism of Marxism to any school of thought. Yes or no? तो पहली चीज Marxist क्या बोलेंगे, that liberalism hides structural exploitation behind legal equality. You can even say that, see, liberalism talks about welfare. Liberalism talks about capitalism. But the same capitalism leads to exploitation of workers. We've also, in fact, we'll again recap. There is a theory of alienation, exploitation. So that is one core argument of against the liberal theory. One. In this you can even add, जब state की बात करो, ये same चीज repeat होगी. For them, state is the instrument of bourgeois class. This is the instrumentalist view of state. So another criticism with the Marxist would have is that the state is the instrument of bourgeois class. Okay. Then we come to communitarian. Now some of you, if you have not revised or not known this yet, in your syllabus this communitarian is directly mentioned. I'll just show you just a second. जब आप justice का topic देखते हो तो क्या लिखा है, conception of justice with special reference to justice, Rawls theory and its communitarian critique. Okay. So here I will expand on this. So you have communitarians like Michael Sandel, like Michael Walzer, like Charles Taylor. These three prominent people, Michael Sandel, Michael Walzer is Walzer. When we do justice, we'll again see their theories in more detail. What they are saying, simple cheese hai. Liberalism, what does it talk about? Individual is the most important. Okay. So they will give an atomistic view that the individual is almost secluded, does not have any important social function. Right. So liberalism ka view, atomistic view of individual, is criticized by them because they say that people are have socially embedded nature. That is communitarians. Think about communitarians and a community. So they will always give primacy to social bonds, social structures. But this is always ignored by the, let's say, the liberals. Okay. Then we have the feminist who would criticize the state again. They will say that the feminist, sorry, the liberal theory of state takes the male experience and they take and make the male experience as universal. The male experience becomes universal and it overlooks, excludes, neglects patriarchal structures. Abhi pe yahan pe I've just mentioned Carol Pateman, but when we do feminist, I'll also tell you Carol Hamish, okay, Susan Moller-Okin and other people. So this is the feminist critique of liberal theory of state. That state is essentially patriarchal, and state is also an instrument which perpetuates patriarchy. And if you notice what I'm doing here, whatever other theories of state were mentioned, I'm critiquing it through those theories. So even post-colonial theory of state is mentioned in the syllabus. Okay. Ab dekho, post-colonial theories, when did they come? They come almost after decolonization, World War II. So when those new states had come, they will see that liberal theory simply says that liberal theory is applicable everywhere. So the issue is, post-colonial theory will say this liberal theory of state is Eurocentric. What is the meaning of Eurocentric? Yes. So they will only think about European worldview as a reflection of entire global worldview, which is again false. And this Eurocentrism is rooted in colonial history and cultural imperialism. Yes, theories like white man's burden. Suna humne? What is the white man's burden? That they have a civilizing mission, that they have come to these countries, in fact they will say noble savage, okay, or these savages from India, they have to be made, again, they have to be made civilized. So they had a civilizing mission, again we can use these kind of terms, a civilizing mission, white man's burden. This is almost similar to how Aristotle justifies slavery. Aristotle simply says that the moment slave serves their master, slave ka bhi fayda hai, master ka bhi fayda hai. In the same sense, they are saying it is white man who will colonize all of you, and in doing so, it will help make you civilized. People online till here, are you able to follow? Just drop a comment. So post-colonial societies, etc. These, even if you remember these four, your answer is more than sorted, because you will not get enough space to write all these four. But this is for our understanding. In addition to this, do you think that there are other challenges which the liberal theory of state would face? You can talk about it in this manner. In fact, wo yahan aur yahan dono mein. Because when we talk about feminism also, we also link the roots to Frederick Engels and how the exclusion also happened. So वो यहाँ पे भी आ सकता है या फिर अलग से इस वाले एंगल पे भी आ सकता है. Yes. Trade wars, ठीक है. अभी I'll also tell you. One, I'll tell you from a multicultural perspective what issues is also there. Okay. अब same है जो liberal theory of state is facing other challenges. And these challenges can also be extended to the challenges liberalism is also facing. Okay. So one is crisis of welfare state. So even the welfare state, so when you would write about welfare states, of course we know neoliberal states will say this creates a bureaucratic bloat. We know what is bloating. Okay, when somebody has a gas, for example, So this is bureaucratic bloat. Why? The structures have become huge and they've become big and they are not inefficient. They are not efficient. Okay. Second, there is a huge dependency that is created. Independence nahi hai. This is also a challenge. This is again a very important point. It fails in multicultural societies. अब आपको याद रखो multicultural. When I talk to you about multicultural, I will again talk to you about the works of Will Kimlicka, even Bhiku Parekh, and this also we will also see, rights में पढ़ेंगे फिर से इसको. So when you have uniform rights, अब आप सोचो when you want to have uniform democracy or democratic rights, similar sort of rights, but there are other societies that have always lived, they have different conception of rights. And the liberal conception of rights is very individualistic in nature. If you think about Eastern societies or even Asian societies, ठीक है? जैसे again we'll see in this Lee Kuan Yew and his own theories. So they are ignoring group specific needs. The need is always individual. और individual की need को homogenize करके universalize कर दिया गया है. This ignores the rights of indigenous people. This ignores the rights of minorities, etc. So this is also a valid criticism that can be had. So in fact, the liberal theory of state will also be criticized by multiculturalists like Will Kimlicka and Bhiku Parekh on this same ground. This is something that we are seeing. जितने भी liberal institutions हैं, okay, are under strain from populist authoritarianism. In fact, all these 3 points and even before you can also use in paper 2A. इस तरह के broad open questions आते हैं exam में. Okay, so whenever you do these points, my point is to give you a holistic perspective. So चाहे वो 2A में पूछे, 2A में भी एक democracy अलग topic है आपका. The last unit that you will see is democracy. In democracy, you can again talk about the failure. Because you say liberal democracy, right? You can again talk about these issues a liberal democracy would face. And you would have majoritarianism. And with this, you can also link, for example, even deglobalization. Remember, in 2024, a question was there. Deglobalization is leading to retreat of globalization. This is the economic viewpoint. You can also think from xenophobia. Yes, anti-immigration aa jayega usme. So the values with which the liberal democracy actually stood for, they are retreating, which is again a challenge to this only. Okay. Now I'll move to the neoliberal theory. Now we'll do this in more detail because this is a separate topic. And उसके बाद I'll do a broad conclusion of liberal theory of state. ठीक है? उसके बाद then we'll move to Marxists. जैसे we spoke about Milton Friedman. Again, a prominent quote can be, the solutions of 30s will not solve the problems of the 80s. Okay? This is something again you can think about. कि भाई जो भी solution है, it has to be contextually relevant. Okay, the solution of 30s will not solve the problem of 80s. Now, I'll just quickly go through some of the important persons highlighted here. And when I'll do the key ideas, I'll explain this in more detail. अब ये जो topic है, this topic is not usually covered that well. I'm going to go and cover different dimensions of this topic. Fine. Just go through this. Friedrich Hayek, बहुत बार क्या होता है? If you remember the names, it is good. But again, I'm not saying कि सारे नाम सब कुछ याद हो जाएगा. Exam में कुछ भी अगर इस 6 points में 3 points भी if you are able to remember, your job is done. For example, Hayek, The Road to Serfdom. अगर आपको इसकी book याद है, he is the one who will say planning is the road to serfdom. What is serfdom? Back in feudal times. तो अगर आप planning करोगे, the more centralization you will have, you will go back to old times. Okay, in the old times you had serfs, okay, and vassals. There was a relationship between them. So his prominent quotes again being, planning is a road, yahi book ka naam fir, planning is a road to serfdom. And these people are very staunch critics of centralization, of regulation and control. They will say, make the markets as open as possible. Milton Friedman का अभी quote देखा, we'll see his capitalism and freedom, will talk about market fundamentalism. अच्छा, see, Akansha, I'll give you that example. जैसे हमने लिखा ना, liberal institutions are strained under populist authoritarianism. In this, you can give example of even the rise of far right in EU. Also, you can even talk about Trump and his populist policies. So Trump also, while trying to be populist, is also, his policies are putting a strain on the liberal democratic values. So that can also be mentioned. But ये वाले जो points हैं, this will be more relevant in paper 2A. Please remember that. Okay. So when you give them, because I don't think you would have too much of scope to write everything in paper 1A. Paper 2A में definitely you can talk about Trump also. Okay. Or even Germany or specific examples of EU. जब हम वो करेंगे तो far right parties, AFD, इन सब के नाम भी लिखेंगे कौन सी parties हैं. But अभी के लिए I think that should help because somebody asked this question. Now coming back, Nozick, Anarchy, State and Utopia. Okay, was this book. There are institutions, IMF, World Bank and WTO. Okay, and WTO से ये याद रखोगे, the Washington Consensus. There were 10 prescriptions given by John Williamson. And this again will talk about how trade between nations should be again left to market forces. This is what I was saying. Ronald Reagan, USA, Margaret Thatcher in UK would also support the cause of this. So during 1970s, we saw the rise of Thatcherism, Reaganism, which spoke about the state should not be a nanny state. Okay. In fact, there was terms like this. There is no alternative. Okay. Are we clear till here? Key हमने exponents देख लिए, right? Now let's go to the key ideas of this, and then we'll go into criticism, and then we'll see COVID-19, etc. So there are many dimensions to cover here. Now, number one, what are the key ideas which is spoken about by the neoliberal theory of state? Number one, you have to have minimal state intervention. This is something we already know. And जो भी thinkers लिखे हैं, of course, you can use the thinker to substantiate the same point. And according to me, these points are self-explanatory, right? It talks about privatization, deregulation, and liberalization, which again was propounded and made famous, let's say, through Thatcherism in UK, Reaganomics in USA. Milton Friedman speaking about market fundamentalism. Rolling back of the welfare state, and you can again talk about why, because planning is a road to serfdom. And same thing, isko bhi substantiate karna ho, if you have this quote handy, solutions of 30s will not solve the problem of 80s. The moment you drop the name of Milton Friedman, the examiner will appreciate. Okay. Then you also have this anti-Keynesianism. What is this? Simple cheez hai yahan pe. So there is no need for fiscal stimulus again and again. The state should ideally roll back. So these are similar points, but again you can have a keyword of this anti-Keynesianism. Okay. So इसमें I think if we've understood यहाँ पे भी just through this keyword etc you'll be able to expand on this. That is the main core idea. Okay. Now, if we are sure about what are the main ideas here, then what is the criticism the neoliberal theory would face? Most of these points I've already explained to you while I was explaining. तो पहला क्या है? Neglect of social justice, and I can club this point with rise of inequality. So when you see Thomas Piketty, his book Capitalism in the 21st Century will talk about how the neoliberal state has not led to enough prosperity, but it has only increased the inequalities and the social divides. So one, neglect of social justice is happening. Second, there is a rise of inequality. So isme one of the best persons to quote is Thomas Piketty. And Thomas Piketty has actually done a Marxist analysis. So he'll see things from an economic point of view, right? Second, and this is again a very empirical evidence that the market failures are also there. Number one, of course, the 2008 financial crisis. Okay. Unregulated capitalism leads to boom-bust cycles. Markets will inflate. There will be a lot of positive sentiment, but few moments back, everything will collapse. Okay. So this directly tells you that even the claim of some institutions being too big to fail also falls flat. That even this is facing challenges. Okay. Then there is a point of commodification of public goods. Dekho, why did welfare state come? So that some important functions like public goods, be it health, education, can be provided to all. But here the neoliberal theory will say state should go away. The moment you commodify the public goods, it will lead to exclusion. Yes or no? Everything will become expensive. Same argument if you use for India. The moment India, let's say India is a welfare state. If we totally adopt neoliberalism, what will happen to almost 1/4 of the population which lives under abject poverty? ठीक है? तो ये जो point है, commodification of public values is also leading to this problem, right? इसी में put a dash and write leads to commodification वाले point में it leads to exclusion. It leads to exclusion and reduced access for marginalized sections. Okay. David Harvey, again through a Marxist perspective, would say neoliberalism is a class project to restore elite power. Neoliberalism is a class project to restore elite power. Marxist analysis, you already know the power is there with the elites. So he'll say just the reason why they are saying that state should go back is ultimately they still want to restore power. Why? Because MNCs, big companies, they call the shots. कह सकते हो yes, but again वो सारे आप two way में use करना. हाँ, yes, you can talk about it. जो भी boom bust है etc. you have different points to substantiate that. ठीक है, but in our PSIR हम कोशिश करेंगे ना कुछ important लोग जरूर लिखेंगे so that it does not remain only a GS answer, right? So this is there, so which is why the name of prominent scholars has to be there. I am mentioning it again and again. You should revise it because see most points by now you'll remember. अगर आप बहुत simple terms से सोचो, we know LPG reforms, we know WTO. How is it different? Is what these people have specially said, right? Now, Now I'll tell you two other dimensions to it. This will mostly be asked in your paper 2A, but I'm covering it here itself. One is COVID-19 ka dimension and the resurgence of state. And whenever you see COVID-19, there were so many articles about return of the Leviathan state. And the Leviathan state is all too powerful, right? And we know everywhere there were market restrictions, right? Individual freedom was curtailed, lockdowns the, har cheez thi. So isme there are a couple of points, most of them we know, but I'll just quickly go through them. Pandemic, okay, so here states reasserted control over their markets, okay, or supply chains. Then state-led relief packages. It was not private-led. Here again notice state assumed the most important role. This will again go against the claims of neoliberalism. Okay? So here return of the interventionist state was seen, be it vaccine diplomacy here. So what was seen? Return of the interventionist state. During these times, 2021, there were so many articles, death of neoliberalism. Because already market ki crisis thi and globalization ultimately led to pandemic. Shashi Tharoor and again a couple of scholars also call this pandemic ko problem without passports. COVID-19 जैसे है. And you also can understand what is the meaning of problem without passport, because it can spread everywhere. Then there is the failure of austerity and the public sector underfunding. ये भी important है. Even the best of best healthcare, be it in Italy, okay, be it Greece, even in US and UK, it showed that the tall claims of private sector being most efficient were very hollow. They were not able to take into account everything, and this also shows that public sector underfunding was the problem. So it actually almost re-emphasizes that the need for public sector to be funding more. फिर same चीज़ है यहाँ पे debate on UBI. UBI we read about. Universal Basic Income, आप GS3 में you also say that should India have UBI or not. But the same pandemic and the resurgence of state will talk about if there are new problems that are coming in. Okay, so there is a debate whether you should have UBI. अगर UBI होगा तो again state role will become important. Okay, social safety nets, green recovery, and then this is a point we all are seeing in the context of, please note, tariff wars, etc. The rise of economic nationalism. This is an important point, the rise of economic nationalism. Right? Reshoring of production, and here what is happening in this? Alteration of global supply chains. Okay? A lot of nations looking inwards, which also will tell you deglobalization जो सवाल आया था. तो अब सोचो जो एक simple सवाल है deglobalization versus globalization, you can answer from different perspectives also. So same for liberalism, I told you what are the crises it faces. Same, the neoliberal theory also faces challenges, and this is one very good point that you can add always. Even the mention of this one line, COVID-19 and resurgence of states, exposes the tall or hollow claims of neoliberalism. If you write it, it will make a huge impact. ठीक है? Now let's move to overall conclusion. कैसे बोल सकते हैं इसको? सबसे simple line है. Let's see. We know that market is central. The policy is shifting towards state capacity building, social welfare. Okay. You can also explore hybrid models, like you go for efficiency of market but have state responsibility. Okay. And the last line is again a very good way to think about neoliberalism. There were articles I told you whether neoliberalism is dead or not. Okay, so what we can say, neoliberalism is not dead, but its scope and its legitimacy are being recalibrated. तो इस क्वेश्चन में भी now you are again seeing welfare state was doing or accommodating the problems of classical liberalism. Same right now the problems of neoliberalism have to be accommodated and brought together. तो यहां पे हम दोनों चीज की बात कर रहे हैं. मार्केट, यू गो फॉर एफिशिएंसी ऑफ मार्केट, बट रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी ऑफ स्टेट रिमेन्स अ क्रूशियल फैक्टर नाउ. Yes, MA, GA, etc. we can talk about to substantiate. मागा हो गया, या इंडियन केस में लुकिंग इनवर्ड्स इकोनॉमिक नेशनलिज्म और आत्मनिर्भर. yes, yes, we can definitely talk about it. That can be for substantiation, but core point is what will हमें याद रहेगा. ठीक है. Brexit can be added, okay, especially in case of supply chains के case में, or how there have been lesser interventions from that front, you can even add it, because one of the arguments made was also that because of globalization so many people are coming in. So there are pigs countries, ठीक है, which are there very close to Mediterranean Sea. They are getting all the refugees and they don't have resources. But France, Germany, England, the ones above, they are making all these tall claims कि हाँ ही सब लोग आ जाओ, वो लोग को ले, they are not letting or having the people. So even that can be then added. Okay. अब लास्ट में ओवरऑल लिखो कंक्लूजन, जस्ट टू समराइज एवरीथिंग, and this will also tell you that how we are phrasing some terms. The liberal theory of state, overall conclusion, just to almost encapsulate everything. The liberal theory of state remains foundational to modern democracies, remains foundational to modern democracies, emphasizing individual rights, comma, rule of law, and limited government. Full stop. However, its neoliberal variant, however, its neoliberal variant, with its focus on market fundamentalism, with its focus on market fundamentalism and minimal state, has faced criticisms for widening inequality and eroding welfare, widening inequality and eroding welfare, prompting calls for, prompting calls for a more human-centric governance model. Human-centric governance model. ठीक है? So in the first line we have explained the overall contribution of liberal theory, but at the same time neoliberal theory is facing challenges and it needs to be reformed. That is what we have seen so far. Okay? Now let's talk about the Marxist theory of state. And Marxist theory of state is also known as this: the class perspective of state. Okay. Now broadly I have told you, here we'll see two things. Marxist state can be seen as, number one, the instrument of state, instrument of bourgeois class. So that is instrumentalist view of state. And second is relative autonomy theory. Okay. अब हमें Marxist theory को देखना है. I will analyze it in two ways. I will see them in post-capitalist society. In that, one I've told you is the instrumentalist view, and one is relative autonomy. दोनों individually भी पूछे गए हैं आपसे. The relative autonomy perspective. Okay. And in post-colonial societies, again you have two different perspectives. One perspective is the theory of development of underdevelopment. Immanuel Wallerstein, Samir Amin, etc. अभी नाम नहीं लिखेंगे scholars के, बस broad लिखो, because scholars I'll tell you separately. And so this is development of underdevelopment. And second theory is this overdeveloped state. बहुत बार क्या होता है, when you read this topic, you know these, but you don't know exactly that this is the flow in which you should read it. Post capitalist को हम इस nature में analyze करेंगे, and then post colonial in this nature. Okay, and then we'll also criticize this same, because when you understand this instrumentalist and relative autonomy, people like Gramsci will say that you are not accounting for culture and ideology. This again happens to be a reductionist view. Liberals will also criticize it. This is economic determinism, yes or no? So that is how we'll go. So up in this format, the moment your format is clear, these are the four ways which we'll understand the Marxist or the class perspective. Okay. So Marxist theory of state in post-capitalist societies. Okay. This will be given by, this of course is instrumentalist model. अगर आपने को नाम और कीवर्ड याद आ गया, आप पूरे के पूरे सारे पॉइंट्स आप लिख सकते हो. Nothing very special about it. This is given by Ralph Miliband. The name of the book is State in the Capitalist Society. Okay. Now, he is talking about, and main argument here in this case, first we'll see is instrumentalist. दूसरा देखेंगे relative autonomy model. इसमें just a couple of points you need to know. So earlier there have been arguments of a welfare state. There was claims of managerial revolution. So managerial revolution is again a term that is used by, one second, James Burnham. So here in this model they are saying that the idea that the state will go for welfare and there will be a revolution done by the managerial class is not very true. State ultimately happens to be that always a supporter, and this will always work in the nature of capitalist interest. This is the core argument that we need to remember. So even if when we think the welfare state is doing from an ethical perspective, yes, state has some noble intentions, that is not the case. State in this case also, that state is having a class nature. Class nature of the state remains unchanged. It is there only to serve the interests of the capitalists. अब ये एक important point है. This managerial class, the ones who are again there or in the bureaucratic class, these are the part of the ruling capitalists. तो ये अलग से revolution ला ही नहीं सकते. If they bring in revolution, why would they want to overthrow the very state they are serving? So the main key argument is managerial and bureaucratic classes are part of the ruling capitalist class. So they are even not neutral and they have no intention to reform it. तो इसीलिए managerial revolution आएगा ऐसा कुछ भी नहीं है. The state will be ultimately the instrument of the capitalist class. As simple as that. This is the core point. So this is what they're talking about. State functions as a direct instrument of the bourgeois. Direct instrument. Okay. Then welfare policies of course are superficial, strategic, not having any, direct moral or ethical motive, but this is just to fool the people thinking that there is a specific motive that they have. The welfare policies are only for the interest of the ruling capitalist class so that they can create more consent. अगर आप welfare notion में जाओगे तो people will think that state is working on our behalf, but it's not true. State is working only on the interest of capitalist. This is the instrumentalist model. सिर्फ instrument सोचो, okay? And second, just remember this: managers and the bureaucratic class, these are nothing but the part of the ruling elite and only serving the interest of ruling elite. As simple as that. This is one view. This is the instrumentalist model by Ralph Miliband. ठीक है? Then you have relative autonomy model. This is by Nicholas or even Nikos Poulantzas. If you can remember the work, ठीक है. Otherwise, no issue as such. This is political power and social class. There is the 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte. और इसी के साथ एक तरह से बोनापार्टिस्ट स्टेट की बात होगी, ओके? बट मेन थिंग इज व्हाट इज दिस रिलेटिव ऑटोनॉमी. इट इज नॉट सेइंग फुल ऑटोनॉमी, इट इज सेइंग द स्टेट हैज रिलेटिव ऑटोनॉमी. सो लेट अस अंडरस्टैंड व्हाट दिस मीन्स. सो स्टेट इज नॉट ऑलवेज अ डायरेक्ट इंस्ट्रूमेंट ऑफ पर्टिकुलर क्लास. डायरेक्ट इंस्ट्रूमेंट किसने बोला? रैल्फ मिलीबैंड. So they will say that no, it is not always direct instrument. It can even play a role as a mediator, somebody in between. Okay, so it can mediate class interest, especially during times of class conflict. The role of mediation is a very core argument presented in relative autonomy theory. But ये point बहुत important है, third वाला. Even if the state is not an instrument, but if there is a time of crisis, then the state will show their true character. Then they will ultimately the class character is visible, which is why the term relative is used. और आप बार बार नोटिस करोगे ये term class character. The class character is again a core feature of Marxist state. Okay. Now one more thing I'll tell you about overall how to think about Marxist theory of state. Marxist theory of state में से बाकी theories of state, ऐसे the social contract theory also. So what they will say that there can be some harmony or some reason why the people are coming together. Okay, in this they actually deny that. They are saying two things. One, state is an instrument. Second, they are saying even in times of crisis, state will ultimately be very loyal to the bourgeois class, capitalist class. Okay, so they have a different conception of a state as compared to a liberal point of view. As simple as that. Because liberal conception is different. Liberal conception, you have consent. In the Marxist conception, also there is a claim for violence and later on the idea of a stateless society. अगर हम मार्क्स की बात करें, Marx utopia is communism. Okay, and communism can happen when there is a violent overthrow by the people, to the extent that the state has to be eliminated even. Okay, so that is there. So again, there is a difference in the conception of Marxist as well as the liberal theory of state. These, I hope these two are clear to you. अब Bonapartist state क्या है? They will act above the classes, but ultimately capitalist structure को ही serve करेंगे. So in the normal times, it appears that they are neutral, that they are autonomous. But in times of crisis, when it really comes, when there is a harsh time, they will always serve and preserve the capitalist class structure. Is this clear? So we have to understand that yes, there are two different parts. So one is relative autonomy model, which you can explain, and then you also have the instrumentalist model. So whenever there is a question, otherwise just simply don't write one paragraph. अगर आप इतना break down करके लिखोगे, then the examiner will know that you have a very good understanding, that you know capitalist, post-capitalist societies are covered differently, post-colonial societies are covered differently. So one is an instrumentalist model and one is a relative autonomy model. ठीक है? बट वो दैट विल नॉट बी वेरी वैलिड. यहाँ पे जो पूरा है, मतलब जो भी आप एग्जाम्पल भी दे रहे हो ना, दैट एग्जाम्पल इज ऑल्सो, फॉर एग्जाम्पल दिस इज अगेन अ क्लेम दैट दे मेक. So whatever we are saying upstate, if it is actually going to serve a welfare role, so we cannot directly say that it is because of this nature of state. इसको आप इन्हीं academic point से अगर justify करो, that will be better, because this is again a ideological point that they are saying. For example, अगर आप Marxist theory पे जाओगे तो उनके लिए WTO, IMF, all these are institutions of Western hegemony only. So they will only view world from one lens. Okay? This is post-capitalist societies. Now let's go to, अच्छा यही चीज देखी अभी हमने. You have instrumentalist model, you have relative autonomy model in post-capitalist. Now if I go to post-colonial societies, okay, yahan pe bhi you have an instrumentalist model which I refer to as development of underdevelopment. This is by dependency school. In paper 2A we will again see a topic known as the word systems theory. In that you can explain this in this much of detail. Okay, otherwise you can simply talk about how there is an instrumentalist model. Simple hai, you have let's say A.G. Frank, Samir Amin and Emmanuel Wallerstein. Now to understand this keyword है dependency. The moment a state has gotten decolonized, okay, so what is happening, it is embedded a part in the global capitalist structure. You have to have loans or grants, okay, relief packages, so on and so forth. आप उस जगह फंस गए, and what will happen, the bigger states will keep on exploiting you, and whenever they give you aid you are always dependent on them. Okay, so what happens, metropolitan bourgeois from developed nations, they control the local elites in peripheral states. तो यहाँ पे term use होते हैं core, which is the developed nations, very rich, and then there are peripheries. Okay, so the development that is happening of the periphery also leads to underdevelopment, क्योंकि वहां पे भी inequalities are rising. So which is why it is said development of underdevelopment. Second, even Africa, अब जैसे Africa में भी if an MNCs would do some development, they will extract all the resources. Okay, so peripheral elites, they serve as, or they serve the interests of these advanced nations. So दो चीजें यहाँ पे, there is one is core and one is periphery. Okay, and the development of the core will happen because of underdevelopment of this. Why? Exploitation of natural resources will keep on happening. Only a very small section in the periphery will get developed, but it will lead to more and more exploitation and dependency. This is what they are saying. This is again a core term, leads to development of underdevelopment. जितना भी surplus बचा है, be it different countries, okay? इसीलिए this same argument is said when we talk about this. Neo-colonialism. You know what is colonialism? Okay, and after decolonization, it was thought that ये चीज खत्म हो जाएगी, colonialism. But now new forms of colonialism have come. For example, I'll give you a very prominent example in South Africa. South Africa में जो MNCs हैं, they actually run the state. They have so much of power. If they want to topple the government, they can do so. So this is there. Similarly, you have the big four, the FANG companies, etc. Very big technological powerhouse. They will also sometimes not pay taxes, and they have so much of power that they will influence a lot of smaller peripheries. If they want to set up a big plant, they know it will create some employment opportunities, yes or no? But because of that, they'll be able to have a very harsh bargain. बहुत कम wages पे लोग काम कर सकते हैं. They'll get land at cheap prices, etc., etc. So that is the main core argument: development of underdevelopment. Handful of people, very small section, gets the benefit of development. Other people continue to remain exploited. This is the core argument of dependency school. मैं बोलने वाला था अभी, China's debt trap को भी आप use कर सकते हो इस angle में सोच के, that it only creates dependencies. Okay, this is the instrumentalist model. Now this is a very important model, overdeveloped state. ठीक है, ये अलग तरह से भी पूछा गया है आपको, एंड इन योर एनालिसिस यू कैन डेफिनेटली मेंशन दिस इन सर्टेन एरियाज. नाउ you have overdeveloped state. Main thing, first remember the name of the scholar, सुना भी होगा बहुत बार आपने, Hamza Alawi. Now Hamza Alawi happens to be a structuralist, or I can say a Marxist structuralist scholar, which means he'll place a lot of emphasis on economic structures. To understand this very well, just think that, for example, this is a political class or the political society. So the moment Pakistan or even Bangladesh, the moment they got decolonized, or I should say independent, they inherited the old political structures, the old military structures. They were already very strong, but the economic structure, the economic development was very less. So there is a huge mismatch. Even when the times have gone forward, there is a huge mismatch between the levels of development in economic level versus the strong military and strong bureaucracy in the political level. So this mismatch creates an overdeveloped state. Overdeveloped in which context? Political, bureaucracy and military. But from a development perspective nahi hai developed. You contrast this with developed economies. Wahan pe the level of development in politics or political systems, military systems and economic systems, there is a mismatch. There is no mismatch. They are almost on the same levels. So there is very good governance that is happening. Yahan pe kya hoga? That is why you'll see the rights of the people can be always cracked down. There can always be assault on freedom, media, speech, rights. Okay? So focus is on again Pakistan, Bangladesh and mostly South Asian societies. So post-colonial states have overdeveloped bureaucratic military apparatus. Society is very feudal and they have almost borrowed the democratic apparatus. वो भी उनका खुद का नहीं है. Which is why you will see sometimes military coup. Why are they happening? In both the areas. Because the traditional democratic structures are not present. Media does not have enough value. They don't have a functional government. Okay? Because it is said normally a state has a military. In this case the military has a state or a government in case of Pakistan. Okay? So that is the issue. Now the state is all very powerful and state is mediating amongst different dominant classes like metropolitan bourgeois, okay, indigenous bourgeois and feudal landlords. क्योंकि यहाँ पे अभी भी there are some feudal landlords that are there, state is mediating. Indigenous bourgeois, the people in your locality, some of them who have gotten very rich, those are the peripheral elites, let's say. And you are also negotiating with metropolitan, the ones that are there from developed countries. So here main thing to remember is there is a mismatch between the political and economic levels of development, which again leads to overreach of the state. इसीलिए नाम है overdeveloped. तो focus development पे नहीं ज़्यादा होगा, focus will again be to hold their own power, which is why the military bureaucracy is very powerful in these states. And the human rights are not given enough avenues. ठीक है? Now, if I talk about criticism of the Marxist theory, even without looking at it, पहला क्या होगा? हमेशा एक common point होगा, excessive या over reliance on economic determinism or over reliance on class structure. Now, after after Marx, there was Gramsci. Gramsci will also say the same thing. Gramsci will say that you are focusing only on the economic aspect, but you are ignoring ideology, you are ignoring cultural elements, okay? And then liberals will also criticize them. So you'll see across this various issues that are coming up. So one by one we'll see. पहला क्या है? Over emphasis on economics. So it ignores identity based struggles, caste based, race based, gender based. Focus is exclusively on this part of class. So it ignores a lot of other important analysis that could have been a part of it. Okay, second is neglect of ideology and culture. Now Gramsci gave his theory of hegemony. I'll again talk to you. So see, what did Marx say? Marx के बारे में आपने सुना होगा, there is a base, that is the structure, and there is a superstructure. And for Marx, base क्या है? Base is made from the economic viewpoint. The structure, the class which controls the base structure is the economic ruling elite, and it is the base structure for Marx that also governs the superstructure. But in case of Gramsci, that is not true. What does Gramsci says? In fact, Gramsci is known as the theoretician of superstructure. So Gramsci says that over-reliance on economics does not explain the current reality of modern world. That even despite that, if these, let's say, rulers, they don't exert economic influence, but they have other modes of influence. They have organic intellectuals, they have traditional intellectuals, they rule through hegemony. Hegemony in that case is soft power. Normally power is with respect to coercion, force, but soft power is you rule the minds. Okay, so that is again a strong criticism of the Marxist theory of state, given simply by post-Marxist scholars here. Example, Gramsci. The neglect of ideology and culture, or you can also say the failure of economic determinism to explain the current events. Why? Because it neglected ideology and culture. Okay. Then it neglects the role of agency, democratic institutions, and civic activism. Let me explain this to you. The moment you say that the state is instrument of a particular class, you are saying that state has no agency. Okay, so even that is not entirely true. It neglects the role of agency. It also neglects the role of democratic institutions. There are also other institutions, even like judiciary, even media, and even civic activism, the people. Here everything is state, number one, and state is only viewed from one particular lens or angle, and there is no agency given to the state. So here state hai kya? It is simply a puppet, which is also a criticism that it fails to explain the other avenues that are happening in place. Okay, दो चीजें लिख लो. पहले तो neglect वाले पे just write down one line. Gramsci argues that, this is a good line, Gramsci argues that state power is not only coercive. Gramsci argues that state power is not only coercive but also ideological, bracket में hegemony, but it is also ideological, bracket hegemony. Same point after full stop. Marxist models underplay how consent is manufactured. This is a very important line, underline karo. How consent is manufactured in liberal democracies. In your margins also write down name of a person. Noam Chomsky. जब हम hegemony ideology की बात करेंगे, I'll again tell you how he also talks about how consent is manufactured. Noam Chomsky. But write just that in the margins, you will again see that. I'll talk to you about him. That is one point that we wrote. इस point को explain करने के लिए we'll write. In instrumentalist model, the state is seen as a puppet. In instrumentalist model, state is seen as a puppet leaving no space for autonomy or reform. Leaving no space for autonomy or reform. Next is Eurocentrism. Now even the classical Marxist theories, ठीक है, अब इसमें of course we are excluding the post-colonial work, but the traditional theories, they also fail to explain what is happening in the post-colonial society. So here just write down classical Marxist models. Classical Marxist models fail to fully explain. Classic Marxist models fail to fully explain post-colonial complexities, including ethnic conflicts, comma, religion, and intersection of multiple identities. Intersection of multiple identities. This is what, for example, F.W. Riggs would say as prismatic societies. Last में ये point है rise of new social movements. Okay? इसमें I'll just first explain to you what this means. Can you give me example of new social movements? Environmental movement or women, even LGBTQIA plus movements. In those movements, can you say that there is a proper class struggle? या नहीं? नहीं है. So the mode of their analysis, only looking things from a classical class perspective, does not actually encapsulate new social movements. By the way, please remember, new social movement is also a topic of paper 2A. ठीक है? So here just write down one line. This will explain this very well. इसी में rise में just put a dash and write feminist, comma environmental, feminist, comma environmental, comma LGBTQIA plus, comma anti-caste, don't perfectly fit into the class struggle framework. ठीक है? So this will give you different types of viewpoints on how the Marxist theory can also be criticized. समझ में आ रहा है इसको? Okay. Just write down conclusion overall. अब देखो कंक्लूजन में वैसे तो अगर कुछ नहीं समझ में आए, the moment you have criticized it, directly you can write, despite criticism, the Marxist theory of class perspective or class-based analysis on state gives us a nuanced understanding of state. This is a very basic, simple conclusion. Okay, so you are just linked it to the previous paragraph, and you've just told overall what is the contribution of it. And you can also say that this work has also influenced thinkers, other thinkers like Gramsci ho gaya and other modern day thinkers, which also shows its contemporary relevance. So here also I'm not asking you to remember every conclusion, otherwise it will be very difficult. Plus there will be many questions which may not be very direct. Okay, so you should also have ability कि general conclusion लिख पाएं. कहीं भी कोई अच्छी line है, जैसे that we did in the previous class, thesis, antithesis, synthesis, that's a good line. If the topic is like that, we will use that. So that should be your understanding. Okay. अब लिख लो the Marxist theory of state. offers a powerful critique of exploitation and inequality, However, जैसे however है समझ जाओ, I'll be criticizing it also. However, its economic determinism, underline this term, however, its economic determinism and limited focus on identity based struggles have drawn criticism in a post industrial world. This is one way to conclude it. And one I've already told you, if you don't remember anything, then it has nuanced our understanding. It gives a different alternative perspective to analyze different theories of state, something like that. Okay. Now we move to post-colonialism. Some part of it we've just seen in the theories of Wallerstein, Samir Amin, Hamza Alawi. Okay? But still, I'll go with this because this is again an important topic. So we'll see what is post-colonialism, some important influences, Frantz Fanon, Gayatri Spivak, and other people are, Edward Said, one of the most important people in this. Here we'll see two different models, prismatic societies and Gunnar Myrdal's. ठीक है, और उसके बाद we'll also see some of the challenges that it faces. Now, just a couple of points. Main thing to remember here is, where did this originate? Post decolonization, that is the meaning of this. Okay, so again it's literary cultural studies which spoke about the newly independent societies. What are the characteristics of these newly independent societies is what this is going to talk about. Number one, okay, expose and overturn cultural and psychological dimensions of colonial rule. So जो भी पुराने thinkers हैं, जैसे this term that we spoke about, white man's burden, etc. So colonial rule was not that they were just governing you in your territory and space. They were also ruling your minds for hundreds of years, and even after leaving your countries, they still rule you. Imagine Indian fascination with somebody who is from the foreign. हो सकता है वो अपनी country में they're actually not that well off. But the moment you see somebody from that skin and whatever they are wearing, whatever they are eating, it becomes important to us. Again, what is that? Ruling our minds. Yes or no? So, cultural, psychological dimensions of colonial rule. Inner subjugation. Subjugation means to almost capture or subjugate, or which means to hold somebody in a spell almost. Okay. And main cheez kya hai, that even after the political or even after decolonization, there is still the way in which the colonial powers still rule, right? So we see that, for example, inner subjugation can persist long after political structures have been removed. Politically, आप आजाद हो गए, but still through your bureaucratic structure, different institutions, military, you are still being governed. Again, case in point being so many different institutions, even in India. अगर हम अपना, even if we see the constitution, it also has a colonial hangover, yes or no? And not just that, abhi bhi just very recently the IPC, CRPC, etc. got reformed. But imagine जो 1860 के जो IPC के terms थे, that was still continue to being used. We say so many terms that are draconian, sedition law, which was again way back in the colonial times. So there is a lot of colonial hangover. So main thing is that a lot of these things persist even after the political structure of colonialism has been removed. ठीक है? So here, what is the main focus of the study? Legitimacy of ये important keyword है non-Western, okay, and even anti-Western traditions. And again, remember I've spoken about Eurocentrism. So according to the West, only their models are perfect. Okay, So here post-colonial studies first of all wants to tell what their history has been, what their lived experience has been, and then also tell that why your worldview is good for your society, our political beliefs, traditions are good for our society. Okay, so in that sense it is again speaking for oneself, right? So again give developing world a distinct political voice separate from universalist tendencies of liberalism and socialism. Otherwise दुनिया में यही लगता था if something is not liberalism it is socialism. But of course these studies and post-colonial thought will tell us that there are many other studies or many other theories that are still present. Okay, I'll also tell you then what is the criticism as I move along. Okay, so this is what we know. Response to decolonization process, one keyword. Okay, influenced by anti-colonial movements in those times of Africa, Asia, Latin America, and main thing is they wanted to challenge hegemony or dominance of Western powers. Okay, now this is again a quote or thing that you can use. For example, the post-colonial state is a creature of compromise between inherited colonial forms and the demand for indigenous legitimacy. This is a very good line to use. इसमें दोनों चीज बता दी. Think from Hamza Alawi perspective also. आपने पूरी चीज inherit करी है, but at the same time you also want legitimacy. So it's a very difficult compromise to have. You don't have your own institutions, but you still want to have legitimacy. So in effect you are borrowing liberal democracy. पर आप कहोगे मेरी टाइप की डेमोक्रेसी है, the Western people can say, भाई you have only borrowed it from us. So this is the challenge, one of the good challenges explained by this quote, that the post-colonial state is a creature of compromise between inherited colonial forms and the demand for indigenous legitimacy. ठीक है? Now, of course, as we have seen in other areas, we need to know some prominent thinkers for post-colonial studies. Okay? Are we done? लिख लिया आपने? At least ये quote जरूर लिखना. And when you go through this a couple of times, you may not be able to write it exactly, but you know what is the core essence here. Okay? Now, I've given a lot of names. Of course, you cannot remember all of them, but some names that you should remember. Number one name is this. Edward Said and his study on most important figure is Edward Said, followed by Frantz Fanon. His book was The Wretched of the Earth. And then there are many names. ये नाम तो याद हो जाएगा, ये नहीं भूलोगे आप. Hamza Alawi. Okay. This is Gayatri Spivak. The name of the book was Can the Subaltern Speak? Because this is a direct topic mentioned in your syllabus, so at least know some content. Now here, if you want, you can write this, although it's a larger quote, but main thing is, in this quote he's tried to encapsulate, let's say every single empire in its official discourse has said that it is not like all the other, that its circumstances are special, that it has a mission to enlighten, civilize, bring order, democracy, and it uses force only as a last resort. But this is the biggest lie. This is what we saw, white man's burden. हर चीज में वो बोलेंगे, the other, let's say, those who want to rule, okay, that they are doing it only for some big purpose. Same thing, white man's burden. They have a civilizing mission, objective. So there is a proper discourse in which they will never want to paint themselves as somebody who's a villain. This is the core idea here, that circumstances are very special. They have to enlighten, civilize, and bring order and democracy. But this is the same thing that is going to be used to rule those people, to put them under subjugation. Okay? I think this is too long, ये पूरा याद भी नहीं कर पाओगे, इसका essence समझ लो. Other than that, you have some people, Partha Chatterjee hai, Samir Amin, Emanuel Wallerstein, we just saw that in the dependency part, okay? So इसमें just remember some of these names. Abhi Sudaptu Kaviraj, Ashish Nandi has also done prominent works on Gandhi. Okay, so again we'll see some of this. Sudaptu Kaviraj also, when we see the Indian national movement and the economic perspective on that, so wahan pe bhi dekhenge. All these are some post-colonial perspectives. So my point is, remember Edward Said, his work on Orientalism, Franz Fanon, very prominent, Gayatri Spivak, and at least one or two more names, so that you know what these people have done overall in their own. Dekho, his work, first of all, Edward Said tried to expose all the deficiencies of the Orientalism. Main thing which the Orientals, there are two terms, Occidental and Oriental. The Oriental, what they said, that they were on a mission to civilize the world. So he wanted to expose that this is not their true intention, right? And while doing so, he basically called out that these liberal or the Western institutions only wants to impose, they only want to govern, okay? And this will only be leading to exploitation. आप ये याद करो, जैसे कि when we saw about moderates. So moderates, initially everybody had a good view of the Britishers that they're actually doing some development. But just after that, you had the drain of wealth theory. ठीक? The drain of wealth theory is almost going to be a very vicious attack on the work of British. Same thing Edward Said has done. In his work on Orientalism, he will expose all the good things that they were projecting and saying that they were no noble intentions. All they really wanted was some slaves. They wanted the resources, cheap cost, and in doing so also they only gave good big missions that we are here to enlighten you, to civilize you. So he has a very prominent work on exposing the existing colonial structure. That is why he's a very prominent thinker. Are you able to understand till here? Okay. Now, if I want to understand these societies, there are 2 or 3 ways to do it. This I've already explained to you. This you should also additionally add. When you want to analyze these societies, the post-colonial societies, you have to talk about development of underdevelopment. Because even after getting independence, they are still being exploited. These societies also have an overdeveloped state. This we have seen, but these societies can also be viewed from 2 different lenses. Okay. So F.W. Riggs talks about prismatic society. And then we'll also see Gunnar Myrdal, soft state. And you would have seen many times, India is also be said to be a soft state. So we'll see how. अब इसमें क्या है, Riggs के केस में prismatic, okay? So here he has something known as a fused prismatic model, differentiated model. If you remember it, okay, but even if you write prismatic societies, the examiner will remember. Just say you have a prism, when the light goes, it creates so many different parts, yes or no? In the same model, what he will try to say, that these societies have multiple lines, identity lines. They are very fractured and there are multiple prisms in that. So here, traditional and modern institutions coexist and clash. This is a very important line. There is an existence of tradition and also modernity. Tradition means you have old structures. Modernity means now you know new values like liberalism, freedom, rights, democracy. पर आपके old structures तो feudal हैं. You already had very regimented societies. Maybe you had a authoritarian rule. So there is going to be a clash between them. And this is something we keep on seeing also in practice. So post-colonial societies are prismatic. Yes, please remember, where tradition and modernity or traditional or modern institutionals coexist and clash, leading to formalism and practice. Formalism means on paper what is being said is very different, on practice what is there is totally different. these areas have nepotism. हम लोग, we make a lot of noise about nepotism in Bollywood, right? But if you really see political structures, so good point, judiciary. In judiciary, you have uncle judges syndrome. Suna hoga. Same thing if you go to corporate structures also. If you look at corporate structures, board members, there is a lot of nepotism, but then you see nepotism again as being a core feature of these prismatic societies. So not only, I gave you example that dynastic politics is not exclusive to India. In even South Asia, if you see the whole Bhutto family, for example, or the same family in Sri Lanka, it is the whole family that is continuing to rule for almost 40-50 years, right? There are many conflicts. Why there are conflicts? Because institutions don't have specialized role. Overlap ho raha hai har jagah. This is happening. And there is large bureaucratic structure, which has not reformed as much. This is also there. Bureaucratic inefficiency. So all these things, when you put them in the perspective, continues to haunt. And this also leads to challenges in this case. Okay, then you have Gunnar Myrdal, very easy to understand. His book is Asian Drama. In that the term soft state was mentioned. What is a soft state? Lacks the capacity or will to implement the policies ineffectively. In fact, in his book, he also raised the question whether India would be able to solve poverty for its people. So he mentioned India being a soft state, does not have enough capacity and does not have enough will to implement it, and highlights there is policy inertia, administrative weakness, leniency, corruption. All these things you would find even true right now. This book is very old, 1968. And this also tells, and by the way, the term soft state is not just only for India. Even if you go to Latin America, a soft state simply means all these enforcement not up to the mark. That laws are there, but implementation of laws is a huge challenge. And this is something that we have been seeing, yes or no? So when you understand and go through these different analysis, so then you would understand these two parts main. So here, these are two good frameworks. So whenever you have to write about how to analyze the nature of post-colonial societies, you can also mention this under this heading of nature of post-colonial. One view is of course Marxist, that we have seen, but you can also talk about this, that they have fragmented identities. Okay, and the capacity of state is limited to implement the reforms. Okay, now just write a couple of things, because I think I'll just also give you one or two lines on Edward's side also, which you can actually write in the exam. So now we'll write a couple of things, okay? So first write down, Edward Said's Orientalism explains how Western societies have depicted the Orient, bracket mein East, in a biased manner, to justify their rule, citing civilizing missions, and myths like white man's burden, full stop. The Western view was superior, oh sorry, Western view projected itself superior. The Western view projected itself superior and rational, whereas the Orient was shown as backward and irrational. Orient was shown as backward or irrational. This is one thing that you should know. Okay. Second, just write down a couple of words about Riggs prismatic societies. So write down the Riggs model offers a detailed understanding of developing countries with features like detailed understanding of developing countries with features like. Now I'll tell you some of the keywords. There are total 7 keywords. सातों के साथ याद मत रखो, 3-4 याद रखेंगे about prismatic societies. So number 1 is heterogeneity. Now this term you will understand, you know what is homogeneity? Homogeneous, uniform. So he will simply say these societies are heterogeneous, not homogeneous. So in heterogeneity, write down dash. The society is a mix of multiple identities. Second is formalism. Put a dash. There is a gap between what is formally prescribed and what is effectively practiced. And then one more you can write is overlapping structures. Overlapping structures. Put a dash and write leading to fragmented and inefficient bureaucracy. Fragmented and inefficient bureaucracy because of overlapping structures. So whenever you get a question, what are the challenges the post-colonial state faces? Instead of directly writing them, write Riggs model and then explain this. You also have Gunnar Middle, same thing they explain. Okay. Now, so what have we understood so far? देखो मैंने यहाँ पे I have not explained this again. This is something that you can again add to this. That for example, the post-colonial societies have overdeveloped state. Why? Because you know military bureaucracy are already developed, but economic structure is not developed. Same in this case also. How development of underdevelopment happens. This again is a core feature of post-colonial societies. This also explains neo-colonialism and the subjugation of these countries. Yes or no? This I have not explained separately. You are expected to write it. या तो half a page leave करो इसके लिए. These all are features of post-colonial societies. Because we've already done it in the previous part. ठीक है? नहीं तो चलो 1-2 लाइन और ऐड कर लो. Many post-colonial states face economic challenges due to many post-colonial states face economic challenges due to resource exploitation, comma, neo-colonialism, put a dash and write where the core exploits, the core states exploits the periphery states. And when you write these terms, core and periphery, bracket mein you have to mention either Immanuel Wallerstein or write dependency school. So this is also a key feature of post-colonial states, that they continue to suffer economically despite having gotten independence. Okay? Okay, then write down एक अलग से लास्ट की दो हेडिंग्स हैं. One is the significance of this theory. And we'll also see criticism also. Significance, I'm just telling couple of points. Some you already know, couple of that you can add. Okay. So significance में it challenged the traditional Western hegemony. Second, the different subaltern perspectives, they will improve our understanding. Third, you can write down highlighted the structural inequalities post decolonization. Next, emphasized cooperation amongst third world countries. Third world countries. And last point, you can write the need to preserve post-colonial states' sovereignty. The need to preserve post-colonial states' sovereignty against metropolitan capital. Against the metropolitan capital. Now, whatever we have written, so जो भी हमने अभी लिखा है, I want to just ask from you, what should be the criticism of the post-colonial theory of state, if we have to criticize it? Anything that comes to mind? Any point that you can think of? So we will write a couple of points. Number one, overemphasis on colonial legacy. Overemphasis on colonial legacy. And one of the main argument, you'll also see a lot of Eurocentric scholars. जैसे sometimes if you watch Oxford वाली debates, एक बहुत famous debate है that does Britain owe India reparations? Again a very famous debate of Shashi Tharoor. तो उसमें one side of the argument says that Britishers etc. did also a lot of development in India, railway tracks, so on and so forth. And if it was not for the development, India would have not developed themselves. So we've already spent money. Why should we give you money again? Okay. So one of the view is that the post-colonial scholars blame every failure on the part of colonial rule. They would not acknowledge their own inefficiencies. So ये एक challenge है. Of course, we can say this can be a Eurocentric view also, but this is one point you can write, that according to the European critics, post-colonial theory downplays indigenous failure. Post-colonial theory downplays indigenous failure and post-independence decisions. And blames everything on colonialism. It downplays indigenous, मतलब आपके खुद के failures, your own failures, and post-independence decisions, and blames everything on colonialism. Second, the same point, this is also can have historicism, which is what? Selective or ideological use of history. You'll only pick and choose some events. So you can write selective interpretation of history. Selective interpretation of history can ignore pre-colonial injustices. Again, in some European books, you will find the same thing, that before the colonial rule, India still had some problems, right? So pre-colonial injustices or continuities that persist after decolonization. Okay, and the last you can write that some subaltern studies are accused of portraying masses as pure victims . Are accused of portraying the masses as pure victims and neglecting agency, diversity and internal hierarchy. This again simply means बहुत societies में there are already caste hierarchies, there are also gender based discrimination that is going on. So what is seen that the moment colonial rule came, you are simply saying this society was only a victim and you are forgetting the internal divisions you had, you are blaming everything. So this is again a criticism. एक और चीज ये भी है कि this is mostly offering critique but does not offer other practical solutions, and the solutions that they offer are the same solutions which are offered by European people. That for example you need democracy. आप भी अगर घूम फिर के democracy ही बोलोगे, so they'll make the same thing. This is what we have been saying for some years, right? So यहाँ पे issue is with respect to practical insight is limited. What can actually be done in practice? So this is something that is said. In fact, the same argument is also most made for postmodernist also. Postmodernist हर एक claim को बोलेंगे ये गलत है, पर फिर लोग पूछेंगे अच्छा आप बोलिए आप क्या बोलते हैं, हम तो कुछ बोलते नहीं. Everything is a narrative, everything is a discourse. So if you actually happen to criticize everybody, people will also ask you what are you saying, is that truth? And the moment you say what I'm saying is truth, every other source will say now we'll also criticize you. ठीक है? So this is what you can write here also. If you want to conclude it, same format में लिखेंगे. इसको चलो लिखो भी नहीं, but वही है, despite criticisms this aims or deepens our understanding of states post colonization. तो conclusion तो आप you can also write in that front. Now just before I come to this, कोशिश करो, I think एक question तो I'll just give, maybe you can just brainstorm here in the class itself. Question है हमारा, just write this question down. Post colonial theory of state. Whatever we have read, try to think about it. I'll just have a very short timer, 5-minute timer. The question is post colonial theory of state. First make an outline, and then on the outline just a couple of keywords that you will expand on. People online as well. उसके बाद we move to feminist theory of state. Achha, people online, in case you want to share the outline, you can do so in the chat. Okay, so I'll just read one of your friends' outline, and you can also, we'll quickly brainstorm so that we know. देखो, अगर whenever you get a question on any theory of state, if it is a bigger question, let's say 20 marks का है, you can start with what a state is, okay, which means political science begins or ends with the state, or in political theory, state has been one of the most contested concept, okay. वैसे कुछ ऐसे keywords हैं which we can use, or you can talk about the state has been analyzed by multiple perspectives. And then jump to what perspective they are asking you. इसमें से कुछ भी कर सकते हैं use. If it is a 10 marker, of course, directly you can jump to the question itself. Okay? Then don't beat around the bush. वहाँ पे space ही 150 words है. But I'm saying because you can be asked 15 marker also and a 20 marker also. तो अगर आपसे जिस भी topic पे पूछा है, that is why I said if the question is on behavioralism, direct 10 marker है, you will have to keep it short. But if it is a 20 marker, you can go to more in detail about inadequacies of traditional approach, then go to behavioral. In the same manner, ये कुछ point है, नहीं तो when I share the PDF with you, state पे one is Garner, you also have Gettel and a couple of thinkers, जो भी आपको अच्छा लगे, ये सबसे आसान है. Begins and ends with the state, you can easily remember it. Okay, I'll share that now. Introduction में, let's say your background is post World War II, colonial injustices, etc. ठीक है, आप बात कर सकते हो. Emerged against the Eurocentric theories, fine. And now in the body you've mentioned all Edward Said की debate है, Gayatri Spivak's view on the subaltern, ठीक है. ठीक है, अब when you write it, एक तो है कि you write the scholars, but you can also say, start करोगे कि हाँ, post-colonial state has the following features which have been analyzed through by or the lens of certain scholars. उस preface के बाद you can mention them, okay? Or the key exponents of this approach include, I write Edward Said, Franz Fanon, दो तीन चार नाम, and then the post-colonial state has been analyzed through multiple perspectives, okay? So in the work of Edward Said, एक paragraph वो आ गया. Then you can talk about, let's say, overdeveloped. Then you can go into that Marxist analysis of post-colonial societies can be understood again in two ways. One is the instrumentalist view, okay, which we have seen, and one again is the different view. तो dependency school देखा, तो आपने ये सब बता दिया, okay. And then of course we can talk about significance, fair point, voice. It gives the voice, talks about solidarity. It also is very important here. जहाँ पे भी आपने लिखा है emerged against Eurocentrism, that is good. Main thing is it challenged the hegemony of the dominant Western narrative because you wanted the non-Western narrative to be heard as well. Okay? बाकी criticism पता है मैं, overemphasis हो गया या historicism है, and overall then there's a conclusion. Okay? So that's a good structure to write. Just that जो आप ये points डालोगे ये, इसको कैसे लिखोगे वो थोड़ा सा important हो जाएगा. ठीक है? So this is one question I want you all to write as well. एक तो है, see, brainstorming पे you get ideas how to write it, but the next step is to actually formulate it and make it better. ठीक है? Okay. Now let's move to the last topic in this particular area. So we are talking about feminist theory of state. Okay. Now before that, we should know what is feminism also. What is feminism? How can we define it? We say feminism is a meta ideology. Why is it meta? Because within feminism there are many different strands. You have a liberal view in feminism also, even a Marxist view in feminism. You also have a radical view in feminism also, right? So overall, what is feminism? Is a meta ideology, but the core of feminism is empowerment of women, okay? And in doing so, it will also tell you the inadequacies of existing models, that they have not been very much inclusive. They are traditionally male-centric models which have been universalized, homogenized, and does not include the lived experiences of women, etc. Right? So main चीज जब भी feminism की बात करो, या feminist theory की main core of this is what? Empowerment of women. Similarly, democracy is what? Empowerment of people. Now, here some very core points which I'm going to reflect to you, because बहुत बार क्या होता, feminism pe you have a lot of content, but sometimes we struggle in feminist theory of state pe. Okay. Now, directly, I'm telling you which states is arguing, and then we'll see the works of different scholars also. State is not a neutral arbiter. ये same चीज Marxist भी कहते हैं. Yes or no? Marxist say that state is not neutral. It is either relative autonomous or is it instrument of the bourgeois. Not neutral, but it reflects and reinforces patriarchal power structures. So here these keywords are important. Right? State is not a neutral arbiter, but it is an institution that reflects and reinforces patriarchal power structures. Okay? Same thing, laws, policies, institutions of the state have what? Have historically privileged the male experience and authority. This simply means it has excluded and even subjugated and exploited the concerns for women. Yes or no? Right? Now, here you have to talk about some important people who have explained this idea. This again we'll repeat it when we do feminism, but yahan pe you'll get a very core idea about this. We'll see significance and then again same criticism. Ab dekho, Catherine McKinnon, you'll see the name many a times. In Towards, ab ye sabse important hai yahan quote karna. Kyun? Book ka naam hi hai Towards a Feminist Theory of State. So this has to be the most appropriate, right? I've also added other, but they are also giving other views, but the most accurate view is this. Naam hi hai because we are talking about the feminist theory of state. Okay? So she basically talks about there is no feminist theory of state. There is only a feminist theory of power. Okay? Kyun? Kyunki state hai. State is simply an instrument of male dominance. State mein jo bhi laws hain, these are written from a male perspective and not from a female perspective. Again, same cheese, laws on rape or workplace often fail to reflect the lived realities of women. That is again, so again, this is an important, calls the state a male institution. This way, if you remember, when I look at the state, it appears male to me, which sustains social construction of gender hierarchy. So this is again a prominent work that we need to know. Sare charo points nahi, but again, if you know 1 or 2 points here are enough for you to understand what the core argument is. Then you have heard about social contract. Here, Carol Pateman talks about the sexual contract, and it criticizes the liberal social contract. Abhi humne dekha Hobbes, Locke and Rousseau. Ignoring women were excluded here from the original contract. So this is why the Carol Pateman says that you have to have a sexual contract. Okay? So in a social contract, the issue is the contract that you are seeing, patriarchy is already embedded inside it. So women are already under domination. They are already subjugated. So the state that you're creating from a social contract is again only going to lead to, let's say, perpetration of patriarchy. It is only going to lead to exploitation. So patriarchy ho gayi hai institutionalized, family में भी है, and via state. So similar views of both of them. According to Catherine McKinnon also, state is a male institution, and here also the social contract institutionalizes patriarchy, and there is also sexual contract. So family में भी subjugation है, और state के level पे भी there is a subjugation. Both things are equally important. Now, this term I have used couple of times when we saw the question, various interpretations of word political. So, ये statement directly this was also been asked by UPSC. Personal is political, right? So Carol Henisch and Susan Moller-Okin, actually Carol Henisch gave this term and Susan Moller-Okin gave 4 interpretations of this. So when I'll do feminism, these are only a couple of topics that are left that we'll do. But overall, what you have to know, that it simply says that jitne bhi whatever private experiences are there, earlier what you used to think कि public sphere में you have state. Okay, in public sphere there can be some subjugation, but if you actually go into the private sphere, there is also, let's say, domestic violence. There is the reproductive rights are also not given properly. So personal is political is highlighting that women face challenges both in personal as well as the private space, and in that case also state happens to be an institution of patriarchy, which influence not only in the public sphere but also in the personal sphere. कैसे? Domestic violence या rape या workplace पे जो laws हैं, again they are not very much women centric. So again you see a similarity in the statements that are being made. So while you have laws, domestic violence, अब आप सोचो ना domestic violence, अगर just look at the term domestic violence. So according to feminists, violence is already happening outside, which is both real also, right? And here also, when the moment you acknowledge domestic violence, it also means through patriarchy, what is happening in the public sphere is also mimicked in the private sphere. Okay? इसीलिए इसके बाद there were a lot of legal reforms, welfare support, gender sensitive budgeting, governance, so which also is what they will talk about. Then Iris Marion Young will talk about politics of difference. And here simple है, यहाँ पे what they will talk about, the normal liberal equality does not include group based differences. Everybody is same. Okay, so in traditional sense, if I say man and a woman is same, but the lived experience for both are very different. Okay, what they simply say, you have to recognize different groups, can be gender based, race based, class based. The moment you use these terms, remember a keyword I've told you, intersectionality. So politics of difference simply means that you have to include different sections, you have to recognize their special needs, and you have to give them adequate protection. That is the difference that will happen. Same argument we'll also see when I again tell you multiculturalism, okay, and communitarianism, that how different groups should be treated differently. Again remember Aristotle's quote that it is injustice to treat unequals equally. Same sentiment is being mentioned here in case of Iris Marion Young. So we've seen the work of Catherine McKinnon, Carol Pateman. After a point, when you write them down, okay, even if the people online, जो भी PPTs I'll also share with you, but please make it a point, thinkers की spelling बार बार लिखो खुद से. Okay, in the exam you only have pen and paper. Otherwise, what you think, and the moment you Pateman, of course, I know you'll not write Batman, but if you make mistakes, the examiner is going to penalize you. So write it again and again so that you are clear on the spellings. Are we clear on this? These are the main points that they bring about. Now here again, significance, again I know you can also write it, but quickly we'll see a couple of points. Now this brings into attention the gendered nature of power. Power also, law. So there is a difference that is to be there. Earlier everything was uniform. The laws were made from again male perspective. But here they bring into attention that you have to think into account of the sexual politics that goes on. It is not just a social contract, but it's a sexual contract. Yes? Then political theory pe, remember in the previous class we had seen the 4 dimensions of how to analyze and understand political theory. Now here also include family, sexuality, care work and reproductive rights. Many of these are being ignored, yes or no? And even if you see, even right now, when you talk about reproductive rights and care work, it is again very difficult for women in workplace, even in private, to get proper maternity leaves. Why all of this is becoming a news? Because again a lot of work by a lot of feminists. So when I say feminist theory, feminist state, or feminist theory of state, so they would want, this is the politics of difference. तो आप स्मार्टली क्या कर सकते हो सकता है आपको ये पॉइंट है, इस पॉइंट को लिंक करो टू आयरिस मेरियन यंग्स पॉलिटिक्स ऑफ डिफरेंस, दैट यू नीड टू हैव स्पेशल प्रोविजंस लाइक फॉर केयर वर्क, जेंडर बेस्ड और जेंडर आउटकम बजटिंग, सो दैट कैन एक्चुअली हेल्प द कॉज, which is why again it influenced gender budgeting, women representation laws, having more and more women parliamentarians, for example, anti-discrimination frameworks. Okay? Because for them, see, why is the laws male centric? Because it is the male parliamentarians who are dominating. They will only think it like that. So until and unless you have equal representation at the, let's say, stage of parliament, then at the different levels, you cannot have gender sensitive budgeting and gender sensitive laws, which is again a very logical point to say. Yes or no? Okay? And then we move to criticism of this theory. अब देखो यहाँ पे first thing is there is a lot of generalization that is being done. The moment you say that state is male or state is patriarchal, it also overlooks the welfare activities of state. Second, state is too complex to be reduced to purely patriarchal tool. So which is why this view is also said to be highly, let's say, deterministic, or this is only a monocausal explanation we are trying to give. State is too complex to be reduced to a purely patriarchal tool. Second point is what is also explained through different phases of feminism. There is overemphasis on gender. So class, caste, race, all of these can actually intersect. Now think about a women in India. Even in India, you have rich women. You'll also have women from different classes. आप बहुत बार देखोगे, this question has also been asked even in GS1, that the women movement in India is not entirely representative, because the initial women movements were only from a liberal lens. They wanted right to equality, right to education. But what about already the women who are malnourished, women who are facing issues of hunger, who are facing issues of caste discrimination? There is feminization of poverty, yes or no? But feminization of poverty is a rural concept. Urban women cannot relate to that as much. So the point is, जो concept है liberalism, feminism का, that is very much applicable from a Eurocentric, a developed viewpoint. It does not include a lot of intersection, which is why you have to talk about the recent works of, let's say, Judith Butler, who talks about integration of intersectionality. That when you go and when we understand feminism, we have to understand for different sections, you have to tailor make it. You have to make it different. You cannot have a single strand. Because see, black feminism is different. Post-colonial feminism will be different, yes or no? Whereas the European will be different. Even in European, you would have the Marxist and the liberal, they are also different. So here, overemphasis on gender can actually dilute the concerns of different classes. That's all, and different types. That is one. Second, same point if I say, there is a lack of unified framework. There are many conflicting views. So radical feminism, for example, will talk about that family even as an institution should be abolished. So they will go for a very radical view. Liberals would say something else. So here the issue comes within feminism. If you have Marxist view, you have the black feminism, there is also eco-feminism, and then also in the subaltern space. So because of all of this, there is again a lack of unified framework, which also leads to conflicting views. Which also makes sense, yes or no? एक लाइन एक और ऐड कर लो इसी में, because this is why the feminism is also criticized, feminist theory, to be very ambivalent. Okay, so write down, feminist position looks ambivalent, AMBI, VALENT, ambivalent, because on one hand they believe that welfare state plays an important role in providing for women, that welfare state plays an important role in providing for women, but on the other hand, it believes that state is constituted upon a gendered ideology. State is constituted upon a gendered ideology which confines and keeps women at a position inferior to men. That confines women and keeps women at a position inferior to men. हमने क्या बोला? This is ambivalent. It means on one hand you are saying that state is an instrument of development, it can protect the women, but at the same time you are also saying that state is an instrument of patriarchy and state is going to subjugate women, so that makes the position confusing. This can also be one of the criticisms. Okay, and overall when you conclude it, you can also same thing, that it also provides us with a nuanced and a deeper reflective understanding of the various sections of the society. It also talks about betterment of women, or in general it, let's say, enhances our understanding. Okay, so we have covered the entire topic of theories of state. Pluralist we had already done, ye hua. Next topic, topics that I should say we will do is, I wanted to start justice, but I think we are short on time. The next class is now supposed to start. So justice karenge iske baad. And all these topics from justice till power, these are short topics. And every year you will get questions from them. Okay? And when I say short, only in comparison to these two. IPT, WPT, these are bigger topics. Okay? So now when we next meet, these topics will be our agenda. Let's see how much we can do in the next class. Okay? The next class and its timings I'll notify it to you. Okay? So I think most probably jab bhi Monday ko, because I think there is already a polity class scheduled. So most probably on Tuesday or on Sunday. So most probably on Tuesday we can have it, or if there is a chance I can also have it on Sunday, but I'll notify it to you beforehand. Okay? Time ye rahega. Okay? So if there is any doubt for the people online, you can just drop a comment on the YouTube, or you can also drop me a message. I've already shared that. Okay? Thank you so much. We'll meet, and if you want to meet me, we can meet outside the class now.